Hi everyone and welcome to the channel, and I'm here for a video about supergroups. Now, I'm not really what you call a huge fan of supergroups, but in this video I want to talk about 3 of my favorite supergroups. Now, the first band I want to talk about is Asia. Obviously legends, and usually when a lot of rock music fans think of supergroups, maybe Asia is one of the first bands that come to mind. Kind of an underrated band, I must say. I don't know if it's because they're a supergroup and that's why they don't get a whole lot of recognition, or maybe it's because they have a more mainstream sound, and because in this supergroup you got mostly people that make progressive rock, and they decided to come together and form a band that created more mainstream sounding rock songs. You, of course, had one of the members of Emerson, Lake and Palmer, Carl Palmer. I believe you also have one of the members of King Crimson in this band. I believe Steve Howe from Yes is also in this band as well. So, yeah, you'd think with these members from these 3 great legendary bands that this supergroup would work out really well. And I'm glad to say that I do think it does work. Yes, a lot of Asia's music is very mainstream sounding, especially with what you get on their self-titled debut album, Asia. I mean, this album is a classic. I know there's some people that say that this is Asia's only good album, or one of their only good ones. I know some people mostly stick with the first 3 albums of the 80s from Asia, but I'll tell you what, this is definitely one of their best albums, and yeah, this album sold really well for the band as well. It's their most successful album, and it's definitely worth checking out if you're a fan of rock music, or 80s rock, or mainstream rock, of course. But yeah, now I think all eras of Asia do have something good to offer, because again, some people might only stick with the 80s era of Asia, but even in the John Payne era, I think there's some very strong stuff, especially from the album Aqua. This, in my opinion, is the best album with John Payne with Asia. I mean, this has some of my favorite Asia songs, to be honest, like Lay Down Your Arms, one of my favorite Asia songs, to be honest. But yeah, I'd say this is a pretty strong album. Now, what's very interesting is when it comes to Asia, like when you compare the 80s and 90s eras of Asia, I think in the 80s you get the more fun side of Asia, but in the 90s you get the more dark and emotional side of Asia. And I think that has a lot to do with John Payne's vocal delivery and what he wanted to offer with this band. And I think both eras are very strong for those particular reasons. Now, there still is some emotion to the 80s era, don't get me wrong, but you can definitely tell that John Payne was really delivering a lot of emotion to this band, as far as their sound, of course. But Asia, I think they're a very strong supergroup for sure, and yeah, definitely a really great band. So the next supergroup I want to talk about is Soen. Now, Soen, I do think, is an interesting band. They are, I guess you want to call them a progressive metal band. They are a newer band, a more modern band that came out in the early 2010s. I think that they are a very good band for the most part. I mean, I don't really listen to them that much, not like I did when I first got into them earlier this year. I will admit that I don't really listen to them as much as I did back when I first got into them months back, but I still do think Soen is a very good band for sure. Especially their latest album, Imperial, which I do think is one of the best albums of the year. This album, it's kind of dark and heavy, and if you're a fan of Tool, I mean, you got to check these guys out, because Soen is a very Tool-influenced band. I believe you have one of the members of Death in this band. I believe one of the members of Testament is in this band as well. I don't remember who else is involved in this supergroup, but of course you can do more research on that. But I do think that Soen is a very strong supergroup for sure. I think that they deliver a lot of emotion in their music, especially with Joel's vocal delivery. I think he does a really good job. I think he has a very good voice. I mean, this is a pretty strong album as well. Their album Imperial, again, probably one of the best albums of the year. Definitely worth checking out if you haven't checked it out already. So Soen, I think they're a very good band and worth being on this list. The last supergroup I want to talk about. Now, you could really make the argument about whether or not this is a supergroup. Some people might call this a solo project, but you could say it's a supergroup, and I'll of course explain why I can consider them a supergroup. But the next supergroup I want to talk about is Knives. This is Demon Hunter frontman Ryan Clark's second project. Now, again, some people might say that this is just Ryan Clark's solo project, but you also do have a member from Project 86 in this band as well. And what's very interesting is Knives, you would think with a member from Demon Hunter and a member from Project 86, you would think that Knives would be rock or metal, right? Since, you know, both Demon Hunter and Project 86 do make some pretty heavy music, so you would think that when these two members come together, they would form something that is a little on the heavier side. Now, I still would say Knives is a heavy band per se, but not in the way that some people might think. Some people might think heavy, maybe rock or metal, right? But no, Knives is more so an electronic project. And I have to say that the type of electronic music that Knives creates is very unique. And like I said, it's kind of heavy in the way that some people might not realize. I think the thing that's interesting about the way Knives does electronic music, like, I think if electronic, like the electronic genre, like if it had a certain style or sound, like if there was such thing as heavy electronic music, I would say that Knives kind of has that. And you could tell just by the dark atmosphere of the sounds that they use and some of the experimental stuff that they do, and it's just very unique, I think. Knives, they only released one album. Unfortunately, I've just kind of given up on the next Knives album because, I mean, there's just not much information out there about it right now. But of course, Knives did release their album Anxiety back in 2015. This is a very good album, I think. And if you're a fan of Ryan Clark or even Demon Hunter, I would definitely say check out this album. It's pretty good. This, again, was the only album that Knives ever released. Now, they did release an EP shortly after this, which I do think has some very strong tracks for sure, but, you know, given how very little material that Knives has in their catalog, it can be very, very hard to return to these guys. It's not really a lot of material to go back to. And that's a complaint that I do have with Knives, is there's just not really a lot of material to go back to. Obviously with one album and one EP, of course. But all in all, I do think that this is a pretty good supergroup for the most part. So Knives is definitely a project that I wanted to talk about. So let me know what you guys think. What are some supergroups that you guys really like? Feel free to let me know. And what do you think of the groups that I named in this video? Feel free to let me know. So with that being said, be sure to leave a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you for watching. Have a nice day and take care.